Good morning. Welcome to all of you that are here this morning. It's nice to see all these smiling faces, and I know you're happy to be inside and outside. You know, the sun shines bright and the wind is mild and the ocean's nice, and it's just great that we're in here being protected from all of that stuff outside. And the purpose of our being here this morning is, of course, to talk about the Central Reach project, which is a project that we've been excited about for a long time and looking forward to working on, and hopefully some decisions will be made very soon by the commissioners. And we look forward to input from all the proper parties and directions given as needed. And at this time, we'll immediately turn our attention to our town manager, Mr. David Hewitt, to get the program started this morning. Mr. Hewitt.
Yes, sir. Just by way of introduction, I wanted to introduce a couple of our speakers this morning from DEC and Associates. We've got Doug and Andrew Carter. They're down here on the end, and they'll be batting second this morning. And from ATM, the coastal engineering firm that represents the town, I've got Fran Way here, and Mark is following him around today. We're going to basically have a three-slot lineup, and Christy's going to have some opening remarks, and I'll let Christy lead off this morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to just give a brief background of the project for folks who may not know or want some more information about where the project would be. So the Central Reach project would be from 240 OBE to 781 OBW. When Holden Beach thinks of shoreline protection, we think about storm damage reduction. Everything we do on our shoreline has a direct correlation to storm damage reduction. Our main goal is to build and protect other infrastructure in case of a hurricane or other natural disaster, as well as to provide an area for recreational purposes, which of course enhances our tourism. This would be a locally sponsored project. We do have permits in hand from the Corps, the Department of Environmental Quality, and the Department of Water Quality. This would represent the largest beach fill project to date on Holden Beach. Our sand source comes from an offshore borrow site. This is an approximately 1.31 million cubic yards along 4.1 miles of shoreline. And again, it's between 240 OBE and 781 OBW. It's included in our beach management plan. It's projected to advance the mean high water shoreline 60 to 80 feet. And the dredge window is November 30th to March 31st. As mentioned, we have the Department of Environmental Quality and the Army Corps of Engineer permits in hand. We did apply for and receive an extension to the camera permit, and both permits end on the same date now, which is December 31st, 2017. It's estimated as a $15 million project. Dredge costs are highly variable based on demand at the time and fuel prices. I believe we do have some data to compare from another beach town that just put out bids. They do not have to abide by the same dredge windows because they don't have the same critical habitat concerns in regards to turtles and other environmental issues, so they can do some of their stuff during the summer where we can't. No federal money has been available in the president's budget, and there's no indication of any future money as far as the feds go. The Central Reach borrow source is about 2 miles off the western end of Oak Island. Our first choice would be to use a hopper dredge, which is expressed in our permit. There's been consideration and talk with our engineer that we may look at a cutter head dredge if we get to that point for price comparison, exploration of cost and benefit. So why are we talking about it now? Our permits expire December 2017. An extension this time would require one from both CAMA and the Corps. And we don't know if that would cause any additional stipulations to be placed on the permit. That could very well be the case. Fuel costs are the lowest that they've been in recent history. Right now, there's no large-scale dredge-related national projects as those that were associated after Superstorm Sandy. And the financing method used could have time constraints and could impact our upcoming budget process. And as you know, we'll be starting our budget workshop. So that's an important reason we need to talk about it now. So without further ado, I'm going to now turn it over to our engineer, Fran Way and Mark, and they can give you guys a little more background as relating to the engineering components.
Hi, my name is Fran Way. I'm here with Applied Technology Management. We're the coastal engineering firm that's working with the town. Just a brief overview of the project and the engineering components of that project. Just a general regional map. This is Holton Beach. We have the net sediment transport is to the west. Generally, the offshore is sand stars. We had to look around we looked off Holton Beach for sand first, but we really didn't find a really good sand source off there. So we did have to go a little bit to the east over towards off Oak Island. So it is tough to find sand off there, and so this is a major project. But there are pockets, and we did find one. But that's just a regional overview. These are some images of, this is more the east end, but in the 90s, there was quite a bit of erosion on Holton Beach, and I'm sure some of you experienced this firsthand. The Corps didn't really step up their nourishment, and the town, until about 2000, 2002, with the Wilmington Harbor deepening, where they put about 600,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach. There was lots of erosion, and this was just last year, hurricane season, and these are images of Tropical Storm Ana. And you can see this is a central reach. This one photo is west of here, so you can see some pretty considerable erosion there. It was really high tides and several days of large waves, and there was significant erosional scarping that was eating into the dunes. In general, the beaches rather healthy, and the town has been doing a good job, and the Corps has been doing an okay job at kind of trying to stave off some of this erosion, where Holton Beach is generally a mildly erosional. Central Reach is mildly erosional. So you're going to have to put some sand on it if you want to keep the conditions like that and maintain that storm buffer. Central Reach projects, there's basically, you have the East End projects where the Corps usually puts sand almost every 2 or 3 years, and then you have the Central Reach project. Back in 2001, between about 121 OBW and about 457 OBW, that's where they put the harbor deepening in 2001. The town has also kind of augmented that and put material as far west as 825 OBW. But the majority of the erosion is over here, and that's just kind of a historical overview of the beach management since over the last 15 years. This is where the Central Reach is going to be. The Central Reach project, and Christy already mentioned that, but this is just an image of it. I also called out, this is Mary's Inlet, and this is Bacon Inlet. Those are inlets that were open prior to the 1950s. These are areas that are kind of vulnerable, and this is one of the reasons why this nourishment will help that. These areas, they're not as highly erosional as the east end, but there's still some soft spots along the Central Reach that do require some nourishment every now and then. This is just a typical profile. When the beach is built, the beach will be about 140 to almost 200 feet wide. But after it equilibrates after a year or so, then it'll only be maybe about 80 feet wide. But after initial construction, it'll be almost 200 feet wide. This right here is the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the GRR extents, and this is that project. The Corps was supposed to do a project along this exactly the same area. That project just was kind of funding wise. It's a long history, but our design was kind of based on their design, or their design, yeah. So this design was based on kind of the erosion trends, but we also looked to the Corps studies, and the Corps, studied this area for their GRR, for their Coastal Storm Damage Reduction Act, from the CSDR, for several years, but that really isn't going to happen. And so now it really is up to the town and the state, or mostly the town, to really do this nourishment at this point. This is just another image of where the nourishment will go. So it's about twice as big as the 2001 nourishment project that was here. But it was actually smaller than the GRR that the Corps wanted to put down. The Corps wanted to put about 4 million cubic yards down, which really kind of wasn't unfeasible from a funding level. It got very strange, and that project probably was not going to happen. So it was probably a good idea that the town really abandoned that path and kind of is going their own way. Here's an image of the Central Reach Bar area. It's about 2 miles offshore. It's a very shallow cut. There's not a whole lot of sand out there, but it's about 3 feet of sand. And you can see here, I'm sure you can't see that, but the depths here are around 35 feet. So we're only going to cut a shallow amount of sand and in about 35 feet of water, about 2 miles offshore. This is just an image of where the sediment studies. This is offshore Fulton Beach, and the Corps has done lots of research here over the last 20 years. We looked at all the Corps' data, and then we built upon that, and we looked at all these potential bar areas, but the one we found was the best. We didn't really find any off of Fulton Beach. Within about 3 or 4 miles, and then it just gets too far and too deep. As Christy was mentioning, the Superstorm Sandy, those were FEMA subsidized projects, and as soon as FEMA starts subsidizing projects, the costs go up. And that was a lot with Sandy. And you can see the unit costs were anywhere from, this was a small one, $8, but they got up to $25 a cubic yard. And even down in Florida, you can see projects $25, $30 a cubic yard, really expensive projects. But then some of these other ones were more realistic, anywhere between $10 and $15 a cubic yard. And when I talk about $10 to $15 a cubic yard, that's kind of an all-in price. A lot of times when you talk to a dredger, they'll give you like a $4 million mobilization price, and then they'll tell you it's going to be $8 a cubic yard to pump after that. We lump all that together and then just we'll just say that that's overall it's a $13 per cubic yard price. Recently, the Dare County project that came in at $14 a cubic yard, and actually they worked with the dredger, the winning dredger, and they got that down to about $11 or $12 a cubic yard. So that is kind of that's a good indication, a good sign. North Topsail Beach, just about a year ago, they got about $14 a cubic yard, which is not bad. That's a good price. Hopefully you can get more around $10 a cubic yard, but 14 or 15 is not unreasonable. For the project engineering schedule, we want to start on the bid package now. The bid package and the design drawings, we have to get them together and submit them to open bid to all the dredging companies. And we want to really do that now. And then at the end of April, release the bid package to all the dredgers, have it open for about 60 days for the project review, and during that time, there would be an on-site meeting, pre-bid meeting with all the dredgers interested in the project. And after that, we have review and negotiations over the summer. And then by August, we have issue a notice of award to the lowest bidder for the project. And then after that, following that, there is some financing related to what Doug and Andrew are going to get into. And then project construction, laying the pipes, getting everything ready, can start in November, and then the active pumping would start in December. And this is just one final slide, and the North Carolina Beach Inlet Management Plan in 2000, I guess it was finalized about 2010. It said, it did a study, an economic study, and it said that the estimated annual total impact for Holden Beach related to the beaches was $92.9 million annually. And it accounted for almost 13,000 jobs. Additionally, the BIF estimated with their statistics and economics professor that a 50% loss in beach width would result in an estimated $14.6 million loss in output, sales, business activity. So that's annually. They have to, the beach is half as wide. You're losing $14.6 million. So basically, the town's beach management activities are of critical importance in maintaining and enhancing its important economic and environmental benefits. And that is my talk.
Mr. Ray, I just have one question since you were mentioning the cost per cubic yard of various projects. Our estimate here is $15 million. Do you know what that price per cubic yard is factored in there?
Yes, that's right around $13 a cubic yard. And we can have some flexibility with the bid package where we'll say, and you notice it's up to 1.3 million cubic yards, where we could do a few different options, where the one option would be how much is it to put the full 1.3 million out. Then we can have another option where we say how much, to put just, 1 million out. And I think we'll have a few optional bids in there to see if we can bring that cost down, if that cost is too high. And usually you can just do one, strategically bid that, and then you can work with the lowest bid dredger to kind of work on bringing that down even a little more.
Okay.
But generally, when you reduce the cubic yard totals, the price goes up per cubic yard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, I'm not familiar where Bacon's Inlet is. Is it beyond 781 OBW? Looked like it might have been. Is it, I should say, is it west of 781 OBW?
If you,
I see it.
Relatively speaking, where the lift station is, that's the 800 block.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's where, all right. So, in case people are wondering like I did, the
Yes.
reason that's not included in the range of the Central Reach project, is it because we expect westward migration anyway of the
Yes.
sand?
Yes,
Okay.
we're putting a pretty large slug of sand, up to 200 feet wide here.
Yeah.
We're going to immediately, we'll get spreading this way and that way. So the spreading benefits will happen to the east and to the west, and they'll be significant.
Thank you.
Especially because we're doing this, usually we'll finish in the spring, and then you'll get a good spreading to the east and to the west during the
Okay.
late spring and summer months.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Who's next?
Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's very nice to be here. One of our very best friends, my wife and I's very best friends, owns a home in the 700 block, and we come here a good bit, and it's a lovely beach. Mr. Mayor, I don't know how you'll want to conduct this, but since we always talk about numbers, that gets a little more complicated. So if you would like, I'd be happy to answer questions at any point during the presentation or at the conclusion.
Very
That
good.
would be strictly up to you.
Thank you, sir.
I can do this. No. Okay. There it is.
Whoops.
Ah, went too far. First of all, I just wanted to give a general introduction to the whole concept of how this could be financed. Unfortunately, at the current time, you don't have $15 million in cash lying around, earning very little because interest rates are low, so that you can pay this on a pay-go basis. Although I will say to you and compliment you by saying what you will see later in the alternatives we're going to show you for paying for this based upon cost, or three particular laid out costs, you are going to have some money for pay as you go, which I think is amply demonstrative of the fact that you've been planning for this and there's been money put aside to help the process when it began. So kudos to you for that. Let me just introduce a little bit DEC Associates. DEC is my personal initials. The business was named between Atlanta and Charlotte when I decided to do this, so I don't know where it came from, but there it is. We provide financial advice to cities and counties in North Carolina on a range of subject areas, but almost by accident became heavily engaged in beach nourishment and how you pay for that. For many years, our firm was financial advisor to Dare County. And as you know, just like Brunswick County, there are a number of towns and beaches inside Dare County. And we got a call one day saying, we've got to do beach nourishment at Nag's Head, and it's going to cost $22 million, I think was the number roughly. And we don't have that money, so we need help. And out of that came a financing alternative that I'm going to show you all those that are statutorily available to you, but then I'll show you the one that sort of emerged as the financing concept that has worked in North Carolina to do beach nourishment. Just a little on backgrounds. I was a deputy secretary of the local government commission for many years, worked for the distinguished Harlan Boyles before his passing when he was state treasurer. I then went to the city of Charlotte to become the city finance director, and then I moved to the dark side, which was the investment banking business and doing public finance work. And Andrew Carter, who is my business partner and my son, is a economics and systems guru, and without him, I'd be in deep trouble. So he'll talk to you later about the numbers. In our initial review, looking at your financials, talking with your folks, I think the town has been very prudently managed. You financially managed. You saved money. You have a separate fund out of which you accumulate your occupancy taxes. And I don't like staring into the darkness, so here we go. So I'll look at you all and I'll look at you. You've identified your need. I think there's been a great deal of engineering and other planning. To have your permit is just unbelievable because that takes a lot of time, and many of the towns and counties we've worked with on beach renourishment, that process is so long to get there. So in some respects, y'all have got a perfect storm happening here in a good way because you have Sandy somewhat over with, all of the havoc that it caused. You have your plans in place, and you of course have your permits and part of the financing in your own bank accounts, which is a nice place to be. Currently, we were engaged by the town really to look with you in finding the most cost-effective means to get this project done, all as part of the purpose, as we all know, to maintain the #1 economic development advantage of this town, which is its beachfront. Fortunately and unfortunately, I suppose, there's always a plus and a minus. We don't have a lot of ways to do this in North Carolina statutorily. As a municipal entity in North Carolina, you are strictly governed by the laws of the state of North Carolina on how you raise capital, borrow. And there are multiple means, but many of them don't work very well. And so the means that we're going to talk about in a minute will provide the easiest route for you to get there. And in many cases, this has created partnerships between towns and their counties to work these projects out together. As you know, or may not know, in Dare County, they have 2 pennies on the occupancy tax that is specifically dedicated for beach nourishment. The county is able to have an active partnership. The projects that we're advising them with now, as was said earlier, the first bids were $5 million over budget, and a month later they rebid and they're $5 million under budget. It's about a $43 million budget. And so timing, how you do this is virtually everything. In their particular case, they have a partnership with the county, and the county has made upfront contributions to the projects as well as payment contributions during the debt service payments by the towns. But in every case, it has held each town equal in what they contribute to the projects. So basically, and now that the bids are in and they're $5 million below budget now instead of $5 million above budget, the county will retain all the savings. So that the towns continue in their position of equal support for the project by tax rate inside the town. All we're going to do today is update you on some boring stuff on how do you do this, and hopefully a route that you consider to go forward. Okay, here are the modes available. Pay go. You have 15 million, you don't, you got part. Number 2 of the borrowed options, in North Carolina, you can use general obligation bonds to do beach nourishment, and in a number of places this has been done. Most often it's been done by a vote, because you must vote GO bonds. It's been done countywide. It has also been voted on town-wide or municipal district-wide in certain cases, but that has generally not been a very successful means to get the financing done. It's also perceived in many people's cases, because there are so many non-permanent residents, or those that are only here for a part of the year, and then those that are here for a full time of the year, it often is not successful just because of how people are available to vote and that sort of thing. The North Carolina legislature has made voting a bit more, not nearly as flexible as it was, and so now you can only vote bonds on a general election time or on a time where you have a town-wide general election. As you know, general obligation bonds must be voted. It must be voted by the entire district in when it's voted, whether it's a town or a county. There are extensive public issuance criteria, one of which includes public hearing, more than one, and of course, ultimately, the approval of the North Carolina Local Government Commission, whose names you saw earlier on the slide from the engineer. For those of you in this room who do not know the LGC, let me just give you a short description, especially since I worked for them in my early days. It was an entity formed when Asheville went bankrupt in 1930-something. At that time, Asheville was the largest and one of the most creative cities in the South, not only in North Carolina, and unfortunately they had overextended themselves and they weren't able to pay their debt. And the legislature concluded at that time that never again would an entity in North Carolina ever default on its debt. The Local Government Commission was formed by an act of the legislature with an extensive guidance on how it would be handled. New bonds were issued under the protectorate, if you will, of the Local Government Commission, and we happened to be financial advisor to the city of Asheville, and about 10 years ago they paid off their bonds that paid them out of bankruptcy, and about 2 months ago they obtained their first AAA credit rating since 1930. So the only city or sizable city in North Carolina that defaulted on its debt in the 1930s is now rated AAA again. Here again, back to what happens in North Carolina, the generally prudent management of finances as well as other things, and so I'm proud of Asheville. It's also a beautiful place. As you know, one final thing under general obligation, the state treasurer of North Carolina, who is the chair of the Local Government Commission, by signature on a letter can force you to levy taxes to pay debt service. So if you vote GO bonds and you were to ever take an act as the town not to pay them, the state treasurer would become your new mayor and instruct you to pay the debt service. And if you didn't do it, would take over your bank accounts and pay it herself. She's currently a female. So very, very good, very cost-effective means to do this, just not often used for the dynamics I mentioned to you earlier. There's also installment purchase financing, GS 16820. The only problem with that is a form of financing where you essentially do not vote it, because essentially you're not pledging unlimited taxes to pay for it. You are pledging a piece of property. You are mortgaging something, an asset. And that mortgage on that asset and your ability to appropriate annually to pay that debt service is the primary credit for that transaction. Unfortunately, in this case, sand cannot have a deed of trust attached to it or a UCC filing so that the person that loans you the money can go after the asset. Some folk have looked at pledging other assets like town hall, but in your case, there simply aren't enough assets sufficient that could be pledged against this borrowing to get to the kind of amounts that are needed. So while this has been a perfectly good way to do transactions in North Carolina, it simply doesn't work well for beach nourishment. There's also a route called special assessment bonds. Whoops. Special assessment bonds. Special assessment bonds are highly used in many places, especially Florida. So for any of y'all in the room who are here from Florida or go to Florida at different times of the year, they highly use special assessment bonds. In North Carolina, special assessment bond statutes are so narrow, really it's very difficult for you as a municipal entity in North Carolina to say, we're going to identify the property owners from the beginning to the end of this project, and we're going to use a special assessment system to collect sufficient revenues to pay the debt service for the portion that you borrow. That's for a number of reasons. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, only to say special assessments in North Carolina is a voluntary process. It's primarily used for people to offer to be special assessed so they can get sidewalks, or in some cases, public utilities, the extension of a water or a sewer line. It isn't customarily used as a tool to renourish, in this case, the beach. But it exists, and it could technically be used in concert with one or more techniques to get this done. It just, to the best of my knowledge, has never been done for beach renourishment in North Carolina. It's been used very little, period. It just isn't a technique in this state that we do a lot. The final one is special obligation bonds. Now, Mr. Mayor, am I giving too much detail?
You're doing good.
Okay, throw something at me if I am. Special obligation bonds are a form of borrowing that can be done in North Carolina and indeed in most states in the U.S. But in North Carolina, the uniqueness about this, it's really only available to municipal entities, not to county entities. And the major reason for that is, not only is a voter referendum not required, you also have to use a municipal service district. The development and implementation of a municipal service district must occur before you use special obligation bonds. The reason for that, I don't know that any of us fully understand, but at this point, that's what it is. Who knows the thought process when this was developed? The MSD, once it's formed, Municipal Service District, once it's formed, can either levy or not levy a tax. So in other words, while to use this recommended approach, for lack of, or the preferred method, while you must establish a municipal service district, you are not required to levy a tax inside that municipal service district. You can raise revenues much more broadly than that to pay these debt service payments. The other thing that's kind of unique about it, and why it really doesn't generally work in counties, is you can pledge taxes and or fees, taxes that are not levied by the municipality. So in most cities in North Carolina, if the county levies the sales tax and the state levies the franchise tax and the county levies the occupancy tax, essentially what the city or town gets is a shared portion. That tax can be pledged as well as any other non-tax source, a fee of some kind that's levied within the municipality. You have a little bit of a unique circumstance in Holden because you levy your own occupancy tax. And so that would not be allowed to be pledged under a special obligation bond approach. The ability to levy it is a positive for you, in my personal opinion, but it takes it off the table. And therefore is going to make, if we use the special obligation bond as the route, it will create something of a unique method to get there, and that's what I'm going to spend most of my time on. Let's talk a little bit about the unique elements. As I said earlier, you can only pledge selected revenues that are not levied by the town, taxes and so forth. There are a few that we'll show you later that you can pledge. At the current time, as we look at your financials and your revenues that would be available to be pledged under a special obligation bond, and I'll talk to you about what pledged means in a minute, you simply don't have enough revenues to meet the financing requirement to raise your money to do this project with special obligation bonds at your current level. If you did not levy your own occupancy tax, you would. So bottom line is, we're going to need to look at a somewhat creative way to structure this particular financing if you were to elect to use it in order to make it palatable to a financial institution to essentially loan you the money. I'm going to ask Andrew to come up here and go through with you how this is going to work. But before we see that, let me give you a sort of a general introduction to kind of how this could work. At the current time, based upon the debt service that we've estimated, and you'll see on the screen in a minute, you are going to put down several $1 million, and then the debt service that remains at the current time, the revenues you have coming to you as a town that you can legally pledge under special obligation bond authorization is not halfway there. It's about a third there in certain circumstances. And so bottom line is, we have to look at a method as to how we could issue special obligation bonds and meet the requirement of having revenues equal to your debt service. And you will note in a minute that there is a revenue that is referred to as county interlocal. And essentially, that would be an interlocal agreement that we have discussed with the town, and I understand the town has discussed somewhat with the county, where essentially an agreement would be adopted, hopefully between the town and the county, in order to affect the balancing of revenues to meet the statutory requirement. But I'd like to emphasize in front of the whole group here, including the elected officials of the town, there is no part of this financial plan that would anticipate that the county would contribute anything towards the project. It would all come out of your revenues. The interlocal agreement would simply be a method by which we could meet statutory requirements to issue the debt. You would be the full payer, if you will, of that debt. Okay, that's the general introduction. Okay, Mr. Carter.
So of course, he's handed off the hard part to me.
Oh, yeah.
To talk about actual numbers. So don't get too upset with me or anything. And I feel a little bit overdressed today. I did not get the memo. My father showed up this morning in this outfit, and I'm like, "Didn't tell me." So I feel like I'm wearing the tux and
You'll know next time.
yeah, I'll get it next time, most definitely. So to start, piggyback on what Doug was saying, and start talking about some of these numbers. We started, of course, with the current estimate of a $15 million project. And so we have uses and sources up here, $15 million project, as Doug said, about $3 million we've kind of targeted to come out of the Beach Park Fund, which is the beach nourishment fund, or the beach fund y'all have here. It has a fund balance, I think currently around 5 or 6 million, is that what you said? So we could use about $3 million of that up front as pay-go to reduce the amount you would need to borrow. So on a $15 million project, we're looking at borrowing at 12 and putting $3 million down on it for the project. So the debt service estimate on the left-hand side there is it's a 10-year borrowing, which is, I believe, the life of this project. And we usually try to match up life of projects or the asset that you're doing to the actual borrowing source. So a 10-year payoff at 3.5% is what I've estimated right now. That's a pretty conservative interest rate for a 10-year borrowing. It's quite conservative, so we'd be well within these numbers. So you'll see you have a high of about almost $1.6 million in a debt service payment in 2018. That's an important number because it'll come back into play when we're talking about the pledge side of this coin, as Doug started to introduce to you. So on the repayment side, that looks, given the value of your penny, and I've done this in pennies because it's usually the easiest way to kind of think about raising revenue in a municipality. It's a penny equivalent is what I would say. You need to raise around 1.1 in new revenue, whether that's a combination of pennies on tax rate or other fees or taxes or savings in the budget or however you want to come up with that new revenue number. And we've identified that the occupancy tax funds that are coming in, we could probably contribute about $500,000 out of that fund that you wouldn't have to raise new. You're already collecting that. You could take that out of that fund. So you'll see you match up about 1-to-1 on a special obligation bond. On the repayment side, a bank likes to see about 1 to 1.25 times what you're bringing in. So if the bill was $100, they'd want you to show revenue of $125 to make sure that there was some buffer and cushion in case you had years of property tax. You know, it's not all constant all the time, so they want a little bit of padding there. So I've made it about as close as you can get. So the 1,599 you need to pay, I've done 1,618. I think that's close enough that a bank would accept that kind of thing. So as I said, that's about 9.5 pennies on your current tax rate. That's a penny equivalent. That doesn't mean taxes are going up 9.5 pennies. That's just an equivalent tax rate that we would be looking at for a $15 million project. On the other side of the coin, we have the pledge funds, as Doug said. And the pledge funds are basically your collateral package. So, you know, when you get a mortgage, your house is your collateral for that mortgage. And as long as you pay the bills, you can stay in the house. If you stop paying the bills, they come after your house, obviously. So same concept here in a special obligation bond, because you're not pledging an asset, you're pledging revenues. They would come after if you didn't pay the bills. So if you defaulted on the loan, they would come after these particular revenues out of your budget and take them every year until they were repaid the loan that they got pulled out. But in the meantime, you can continue to budget and use these revenues that we're showing here, sales tax, franchise, building permits. You continue to use those in your budget as normal. You don't have to set them aside or anything. It's just if you don't pay your bills, they're going to come after these revenues as well, and then you're going to have a bigger, budget issue. So it's a real impetus to, pay your bills in a certain sense. Just like if you stop paying on your house, they come and get it. You need a place to live, So in looking at this, the sales tax, franchise tax, building permits, video program, cable franchise taxes, those are all revenues y'all take in that you don't levy yourselves. So they are eligible to be pledged as part of the collateral for this type of borrowing. Unfortunately, as you see, if you add those up, they don't get to that 1599 number that we really need. So they need at least 1 times on the collateral side to cover themselves, what a bank wants before they'll loan you the money. Just like in most anyone, they want to make sure it's fully collateralized. So this gets back to the concept that Doug was talking about with the county interlocal. The county interlocal would be an agreement similar to, I guess, as we laughed in one of our meetings, almost like co-signing for a car. So your son's buying a car, or daughter's buying a car, you co-sign on it. You're not responsible for anything unless they stop paying. So this is the type of thing where an interlocal agreement would be needed for about 1.1 or 1.2-ish million to make up the collateral package. And this will be an agreement that just basically says it would kick in when and if the town was unable to pay the bill on the actual money. So on a $15 million project, this is what we're looking at. And the revenues there are based on a 5-year average. I'm doing actually CAFRs. So that's about a 5-year average of what these sales taxes and stuff are. And that's what a bank would look at when they're looking to lend this money. So that's what a $15 million project looks like.
Andrew, can I just summarize? for
Of
you?
course.
Essentially, as you see by the 2 tables, the whole difference between repayment funds and pledged funds, you need the equivalent of 9.5 cents on the tax rate to make the payments, in addition to what you already have available of $500,000 out of the occupancy tax fund. So you'll have to find that or an equivalent, either new taxes or a tax equivalent. On the pledge side, because you can't pledge any of your property tax because you levy it, that's why essentially an interlocal agreement is the only way we can make the pledged funds work. Or the town finds another nearly $1.2 million worth of service fees that it can levy. I'm not really sure that's able to be done. So that's why on one side, when you're looking at repayment, y'all have got to find the source, which is the tax equivalent. What source you found to balance your budget is not able to be pledged under the statute. And that's why we would simply ask the county as a partner to backstop you, full well knowing you're going to pay your bills and that you are asking the county to make a contribution to this.
And so when we look at a $10 million project, saving $3 million out of the BOC funds, you're borrowing about $7 million. You'll see that that requires around 4 pennies. Again, the same BOC fund contribution, debt service estimate 3.5% on $7 million, 10 years, 4 pennies, 4-ish pennies of new revenue, which is around $470,000 a year that you would have to raise on that side. And then if we look at the pledge side of the coin, the county interlocal would have to be around $466,000. So, you know, you see, obviously, as the borrowing levels go up and down, the hit to everybody goes up and down. And then if we look on the far side and look at a $20 million project, costs really came in high. This is where you don't throw anything at. And it looks to be around 15 pennies. So for a $20 million project, it would be around 15 pennies, or about almost 1.8 in new revenue you would need to generate to pay the debt service. On the pledge side, that looks to be almost 1.8 from the county for interlocal to complete the collateral package on that side. So we just want to kind of give you a very kind of bird's eye view of cost, where it would shift to depending on how the price of the project came in, and you know, throw that out the first salvo so you can start making some good decisions.
All right. Mr. Mayor, let me make one other point to you too. Because the permit expires in December of 17. The decisions, if you choose to move forward, the decisions to make the financing package work would have to be made between now and June the 30th as part of your new budget. So at first, when I heard 17, I was hoping the permit went till June. It goes till December. Well, of course, you gotta get your project started and finished before that. So bottom line is, this is, if you're gonna move forward currently with your current permits and the current plan, those decisions will have to be made in the budget process.
So just in conclusion, as we said, we think a combination of PAYGO and a borrowed source is the best method for getting the funds for this project. You have fund balance adequate to do that, which is nice. You thought about this project well in advance, and you have revenues, so you don't have to borrow the full amount up front. Basically, the county would need to be involved at some point in order to perfect the collateral package. So, not only discussions on what you're willing to do as far as raising funds and stuff, a serious discussion with the county will need to be had, because they will need to be a partnership with you in this. But as of now, after you've gotten all your information and made decisions, we're ready to move forward based on y'all's direction. So, y'all have any other questions for Doug and I right now, or?
I do. To the, next to the last bullet there, you got close to it, but can you give another foot stomp to how the county's involvement with the project is very akin to daddy signing the car loan, but if debt service is not paid, the county is not left holding the bag. In essence, what happens is that the local government commission comes in and takes over.
So there, as Doug mentioned, there is that extra
I just-
somewhat protection in that the LGC will come in and make you pay your bills. So there's another level of the chances of you defaulting on your loan is pretty low in North Carolina, and thus the protections of the county is pretty high, in that it would not ever happen in a certain sense. But you need their help in order to perfect the collateral package in order to get the loan from the bank.
I have a question. Has this been done before with the county involved at this level?
Not for beach nourishment, and we do have the representatives from the county here. The closest thing that we have to it exists with the arrangement on the sewer issue. That's about the closest template that we have in existence.
And part of-
it's not the same
Okay.
animal, but it's similar.
And part of the reason I asked that question is, within the next 10 years, would there be a possibility of we going back and asking for a second project and a second county involvement? For
10 years is a long time.
No, but that we have a project that could happen very quickly, not with, not 10 years out, a second project.
Well, the lifespan of the project is a 10-year project.
Can I just add a couple things? I want to apologize. It's at $11.50 a cubic yard. If you put 1.3 million down, that would be $15 million. So I said 13, but it's 11.5. We conservatively permitted the 1.3 million cubic yards. You always kind of have to permit a little more than you want, just to make sure that you don't ever get near that limit, because if you go over that limit, then it's very complicated, but you can go less very easily. For planning purposes, the project, we want to be conservative and say it's 10 years, but that's assuming no other nourishment activity. This project, similar to the 2001 project, could last up to 15 years, and that's what we're looking at. But obviously, tropical storms and things like that, we can't, from paying back, you want to have a conservative
No, my question is, we can control that ourselves. We
Yes.
can't control the county's obligation. So my question is, would the county, is there history, or would the county be willing to make the same obligation to a second project if something came up? I guess
The elected officials would have to answer that.
right. Or have you done it before to another municipality, have multiple obligations?
We work with multiple municipalities currently on the projects that your manager mentioned that are related to the sewer. This is a new concept for us.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, are you able to get the participation from the audience on the record, or do we need to pass the mic around?
I think I'm okay with Ms. Hardy, but anything further back, I think the mic right there probably.
Okay. Christie, will you help us with that mic as needed? All right, you still have the floor, sir.
Is there
You
any
finished?
more questions y'all want to ask or anything? If not, then-
All right, Mr.
Well,
Hewitt.
I just,
Not
having heard that this is the first the county has heard of this, and have we factored this into our schedule? And do we have confidence that we, if we approve, that we would be able to proceed this fall?
Well, let me say, the county, we've had discussions for a long time with the county. The current board and previous boards, so it's not new to the county.
Okay.
Okay.
But they're just as desirous to help the situation as we are.
But I think it's a schedule issue. Would they
Yeah.
have to vote, next month, and we'd have to wait, and we vote, and, things like that?
I was just taking the manager at her word that it's the first
Gonna happen.
counted. I mean,
I'm assuming that question was, can we do this, Dave?
yeah, that's paraphrase, yeah.
Okay.
Well, the other question would be, what happens if the county couldn't agree to that? And we don't have that relationship?
That's-
I'll answer it. I'll answer it this way. There are 3 specific things that we've got to get done beginning yesterday, in order to make the project happen beginning this coming winter. Got to get the engineer involved in doing designs and specs. That has to happen irregardless, final designs and specs. That has to happen irregardless of when we do the project. We've got to acquire some easements on the property. That has to happen irregardless of when we do the project. And we have to get up close and personal with the county on developing and executing the interlocal agreement before we can proceed. In addition to simultaneously developing the budget that will accommodate this, along with considerations for the development line that will ensue as a consequence of doing the project. So all of those things have to be done more or less in synchronized fashion in order to get to where we need to be. We laid out the schedule at the last meeting in anticipation that we would do it. This hasn't been done before in North Carolina that I'm aware of. The Dare County examples was somewhat different, but our approach here is going to be unique and in some regards trailblazing in the fashion that we're going. If we want to do a project using this mechanism, it is going to be blazing a new trail. So as was put forth to me the other day, all it is work, and we'll get real busy on it and move forward with that as the goal. It hasn't been done before, but that's what we would propose. If you want to do a project, that is where we have to go with it.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, we'd ask you to keep a really good relationship with the county.
Suck up. All right. Anything, what do we do now, Mr. Hewitt?
The resolution before you pretty
Thanks,
much
sir.
authorizes or expresses your support, the town's support for the project, and directs all of the aforementioned elements that have to be accomplished in order to move the project forward to be done, and directs the manager to move the project forward.
One thing I think needs to be said, and I'm sure everyone in the room is very intelligent, but just make sure that if this resolution is passed, that everybody in the room understands this is not the final say. We don't need word on the street, oh, they've obligated to spend $15 million up at town hall this morning. This is saying we're looking at it, and the intention is to go forward and complete it, but not the final word. So
If I could piggyback on that, there are several specific things. If you'll note, in, I believe it's the last sentence there, by law as appropriate, you're going to have to adopt a budget. That is a document that will come forth to you. The interlocal agreement will require the board's concurrence on. That's not an administrative, that is a contract that has to come before you. Also has to be approved by the county commissioners. The financing package, the bid award is a formal process that will come back to the commissioners for approval. Am I forgetting? The local government's commission application, it has to, go to the state treasurer, secretary of the local government commission for approval. There are a host of public hearings that have to be held. Municipal Service District is a formal process that has to be held publicly, mailings, and there's probably a half a dozen formal steps in this process that'll come back before this board at least.
Okay. All right, Commissioners, I think the next step is to discuss the possibility of your agreeing to this resolution 16-04. You want any discussion or motions?
I have just one point. It may seem rather minor, but words matter. The last whereas in the resolution, it mentions climate change. It says, based on current understanding of financial market conditions, understand that. Geopolitical realities of the dredging industry, understand that. Recent success of similar beach nourishment projects and low oil prices. I think those are far more demonstrable in why we're undertaking this project than climate change. So I would recommend that we delete climate change as one of the items that we're saying based on our current understanding. I support the rest of the resolution.
Sir, are you making a motion to remove climate change and approve the resolution as amended?
Yes, I will make
I'll
such
second that.
motion. Thank you, Mayor.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, are you ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Madam Clerk, it's unanimous. All right, Mr. Ute, what else do you need?
A full tank of gas. I'm good, thank you.
Madam Clerk, does this conclude our business in the morning?
Yes, sir.
All right, you ready to adjourn?
Yes.
So moved.
So moved, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you very much for being here.